I am Lucy Scandrett, Chairman of the AHS Interview Series and currently the President of the American Harp Society. The Interview Series is part of the archives of the American Harp Society, which are housed at Brigham Young University, and they contain interviews of outstanding harpists, teachers, and leaders in the harp world. Today is Saturday, September 29th, 2007. I have the pleasure of interviewing Susann McDonald in her lovely home in Bloomington, Indiana. Ms. McDonald is Distinguished Professor of Harp at Indiana University, Artistic Director of the World Harp Congress, founder and Artistic Director of the USA International Competitions, and acclaimed international harpist and recording artist. Thank you, Susann, for this time together today to interview you for the American Harp Society Interview Series.
It's a pleasure and privilege for me to be here with you too.
Oh, thank you. As you began your 27th year of teaching at Indiana University, what and who are the people and the events and the opportunities that have shaped who you are today?
Well, it would be easy for me to answer that because certainly all my teachers were instrumental in making me the harpist that I am today and the musician I am today.
Yes.
And I was very fortunate, I think, that each teacher passed me on to another teacher. From the time I began studying in Rock Island, Illinois,
Yes.
Mrs. Franklin Peterson, a dear lady who would come to the house and gave me my first harp lessons when I must have been just about 6. And then when I was about 13, she said, you know, she told my parents this, that I feel like I've given all I can to Susann, that I feel now she needs to study with Marie Ludwig in Chicago, who had given her some lessons too. And since I was so young, this dear lady, would take me on the train with her to Chicago once a month.
Yes.
And I began my work with Marie Ludwig Giordano, who was a wonderful German lady who had played with Carlos Salcedo in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra before she married a clarinetist for the Chicago Symphony and moved to Chicago. And she taught in the Line and Huey building at the corner of Wabash and Jackson for many, many years. And that's where I would take my lessons with her, and occasionally then she would take me home with her, and Joe would cook us a big Italian dinner. They were so sweet to me. But they were, so from the age of 13 to 17, I traveled once a month or so to Chicago on the train, mostly by myself. And it was kind of course, Mrs. Peterson at first, but then later I was by myself, probably when I was a little bit older, 17, 16.
Right.
And so then I remember Miss Ludwig saying, you know, Mildred Dilling is coming through town. And Miss Ludwig had been Mildred Dilling's first teacher. They were not far apart in years, I think 4 years apart. And she said, I'd like Mildred to hear you. And so she arranged for me to have a lesson with Mildred Dilling. And at that lesson, Mildred Dilling said, I feel she should go study with my teacher, who was Henriette Renier. And I'll never forget, I came home from that lesson with Miss Dilling, and my parents met me at the station. And I got off the train and said, whoopee, I'm going to study in France this summer. Well, my parents were horrified. They were not happy. But nevertheless, she did. Miss Dilling arranged for a lovely harpist chaperone to go with me. And I did, and that was the first meeting with Henriette Renier. It was between my junior and senior years of high school.
And you felt that Renier was really your mentor.
Yes,
right?
Yes, from the time I met her. It was just a wonderful, wonderful rapport between us. And of course, I mean, I adored her. I idolized her, really, because she was such a wonderful woman, great, great woman.
Yes.
Brilliant musician, brilliant harpist, brilliant teacher. and a devout believer also.
Right.
All that together, it was certainly the perfect mother for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came home from that lesson and told my parents that I didn't want to go to college in the United States. I wanted to go back and study with them.
Yeah. Did you also play for Lily Laskin at that time, and you were
Not
accepted?
Yet.
Oh,
not yet. So the first year I went back and I took music courses at the École Normale Supérieure de Musique in Paris, and studied privately with Mademoiselle Renier. Okay. And then after that year, Mademoiselle Renier said, "I think it's a little too bad for you to have studied here and you'll go back with no degree."
Right.
And she said, "I feel it would help your career if you would go to Paris Conservatory." I mean, again, a teacher having such humility to pass me on, to not just, clamor on to a student. And so at that point, then, she did have Lily Laskin come to hear me play a concert in Renier's home. And Laskin said, "Of course, audition, I will accept her in my class." And then I had to pass the concours, everything. The Paris Conservatory is a concours even to get in, and so I did have to compete for that and did get accepted in the normal. Most foreign students who went to Harvard who went to Paris were not in the French part of the Paris Conservatory. They were in a foreign section, but I was put in the regular conservatory classes. And so then I was studying with Lily Laskin at the same time. I continued my lessons with Mademoiselle Renier, and that was a bit tricky because while they both had great respect and admiration, I think, for each other, of course, Mademoiselle Renier was perhaps 20 years her senior, and she was quite outspoken. So I would take a lesson with Mademoiselle Renier, and then I'd go for my lesson at the conservatory. Lily Laskin would put some fingerings into music. Then I'd go back to Renier, and she said, "What is this? No, no, no," and cross off it. And it worked all right because I could sort of do what each of them wanted from me until it came time to the concours when they both were there. Then,
oh my, what did you...
That was tricky. But basically, I mean, Mademoiselle Renier was my major teacher.
Right.
The way the conservatory system was set up, and Lily Laskin said, "You do not need to come to every class with the less advanced students, but just come for the performance class on Friday." So I was studying privately really with Renier, but it's a class situation in the conservatory. And so I would just come in and basically perform in the class. So I mean, it was, and then I was only there 1 year. Then I competed and won the first prize that year. And I was the first American, I believe,
to receive that
prize. And one of the few foreigners even, since Fritz Kreisler had received it. So it was a major prize for me. I mean, even considered in America, because when I came back after playing the Palais de Chaillot, where the first prize winners were presented, the Chicago Tribune had a big Chicago Musicland Festival held in Soldiers Field. And Philip Maxwell was the head of that, and he immediately was in touch with my family and me and invited me to come perform in the middle of Soldiers Field on a podium as this first American to win the Premier Prix from the Paris Conservatory. It was really in newspapers, and there was quite a bit of publicity about it. And
what an honor.
It was an amazing return to America to have that. It was really, I remember too, getting off the train and in my hometown, crowds of people were there with flowers to greet me. I mean, it really was amazing. Now, I think that would not happen, but I think those were years when Americans were keen to have the approval of Europeans, particularly in music.
Well, they're heroines.
So that was, in a sense, the beginning of my career. Okay. And then I had a classmate at the Paris Conservatory who said, she was a pianist, and she said, "Now, Susann, don't be like all the other artists and go try to make a career in New York right away. Go make a career elsewhere in the country. Play in Chicago, play in Los Angeles, play." I took her advice as just, the truth. And so I immediately sought management in Los Angeles. And my brother was going to Caltech. So there was also a reason. I had a lot of family. My mother's family was from that area.
Wonderful.
So my first manager was Dorothy Huttenbach, who also managed the Los Angeles Philharmonic.
Yes.
You may have heard of her because she was quite a famous impresario. Yeah. And she presented me in recitals in Los Angeles.
Fantastic. And were you under management with Columbia?
Not then. No, that was many years later. Many years later. Then after that, I did go to New York. I also played in Chicago quite a bit, won some competitions there, and played with orchestras in Chicago. But then I went to New York. I actually went to a modeling school, Powers Modeling School. I went there, and also was on the Today Show. I was doing some different things. And at that time, I guess Dorothy was still representing me, but I wanted to play in the Phillips Gallery in Washington, D.C.
Oh.
It was a major venue. And I also was playing, I played my first New York recital around that time in Carnegie Recital Hall. Wow. And then I did get New York management, not Columbia Artists, but another Inter-Allied Artists, it was called. And this manager said, we have to attract a lot of attention. You just harvest, you've got to do something unusual. She suggested I do 3 recitals in 1 week in Carnegie Recital Hall of all original music for the harp and a different program every other night.
Oh my God.
And I did it. Wow. I did it. And I remember all the harpists in that area came. Salzeo brought his class from Curtis, and Mr. Grange had his class there from Curtis, and Mildred Dilling was there. And all 3 of them came backstage, and they weren't happy with the placement of the harp. And I should have had pictures of that, but they moved the harp a little differently. But
wasn't there something about
it was quite an unusual thing. And then the whole reason to do this was for publicity.
Right.
And that week, the newspapers went on strike. So the only real publicity for it was in the trade journals that they did cover it, Musical America, and there were several, Etude, I forget which magazines, but they did review it.
Wow. To try to do that is fantastic.
It was.
Different program.
A tour de force.
Was it more music of a contemporary, considered contemporary at that time, or?
Well, I mean, I did everything from Spohr, Fantasy, and the variations, I think, and Rossetti sonatas that I loved, and Dussek sonatas, and of course the contemporary things like Hindemann. Right. A lot of harp compositions too, Renier's music.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of the Renier.
It was just, unfortunately, I don't know if I have any programs anymore. I had them for years. Okay. I think actually they are in the archives. They are there. I believe that at least 1 or 2 of them is there.
Excellent to know. Well, in all of your performing, you are also teaching. Is that?
Yes. I have to think back. I mean, I was teaching before I went to Paris, actually.
Yes.
I was still in high school, and really in Rock Island, Illinois, and the Tri-Cities. I had 8 students while I was just a junior in high school. And so I did do quite a bit of teaching at that time. And then, of course, went to Paris.
And you enjoyed the teaching when you were in high school?
Yes, I was pretty young myself.
I know.
But I did. And they were little girls and sweet students. I did enjoy it. But I didn't really, I was trying to think my first teaching position. Well, I have to get myself from New York, so I went to California.
Was it the University
because my brother was there, and
yes.
he had graduated from Caltech and was married, and I was close to him and his wife, and I think I felt that New York wasn't where I really wanted to live,
Right.
So I made the trek to California, and it just happened on the way I stopped at Tucson. My family had made friends there with the family of the man who was the Dean of Fine Arts.
Oh.
And through them, I knew that they owned a harp, but they didn't have a harp teacher at the university. And this friend said, "You just must go. Everything's happening out west. You must go west." And so they made arrangements to meet me at the train. I was traveling by train and got off the train in Tucson on my way to Los Angeles. And met people there. And of course, this friend was the dean of the fine arts, and they were very enthusiastic about my teaching there.
Yes.
And of course, I just went to the Paris Conservatoire. I didn't attend any other college, so I really didn't have the equivalent degrees at all. I just had one in 1 year, the first prize in Paris, and then you don't stay there anymore. You finish.
Right.
So I was in not a strong position, not having a doctorate, not having any kind of degree like that. So I was and I knew I wanted to teach, and I really wanted to teach in the university. So I thought this was a wonderful thing, that I'd be offered a position to teach harp in the university without a degree.
Wonderful opportunity, yes.
But I was on my way to Los Angeles, and actually traveling with me at that time was Mademoiselle Regnier's goddaughter, who was a wonderful writer and poet and close friend of mine. I had gotten to know her while I was studying in Paris, and she was writing articles for Radio Switzerland at that time. So she was working as a journalist, really,
yes.
and traveled with me. And so she was staying with me in Los Angeles. And
but you were still continuing your wonderful performing career.
Yes, I was trying to remember too when this happened, but I had another management, and this was after I left New York, that did college tours, and I loved that. And so I toured for quite a while. I can't remember their name, but it was a booking agency basically that booked artists into college campuses.
I see.
And the whole state of Arkansas, for instance, is one I remember arriving in Arkansas, and I just was driven. And another one was headquartered in Richmond, Virginia, the House of Bliss. I remember that. It was another manager. So I had several people who were booking me at that time.
When you were doing all this traveling, how was the harp being transported? Was it
by car? Almost always by car.
Oh my!
I had a driver, a friend of my parents who had just lost her husband, and loved music. She used to accompany. She was a pianist, a lovely lady, and she just loved to go on tours with me. And I had to have help. Really, I did have to have help.
Right.
So Tekla Baker, her name was, and we would meet whatever area of the country, and she would drive with me.
Would you be on tour for a month or?
Some of them, I would say, not more than a month. Though always 2 to 3 weeks would be, several concerts within that period of time. And then, what was a bit confusing, I was living in Pasadena, but I was teaching at the University of Arizona.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you.
But you have to realize, it was my only job, really, at that time, and I was very anxious. My parents had been wonderful to support me, but I knew I was on thin ice. I needed to get a job, and concert work was so irregular and didn't pay so well. The expenses were great too.
Right.
So I felt I must do that job, to take that job. But my whole family was in Los Angeles, not my parents, but everybody else, my aunts and uncles and cousins and brother. So I stayed in Los Angeles, but I commuted by car, usually drove myself over to Tucson.
Wow. And
I would go every other week, and had a fine class of students, and I played a recital there every year too, And then I don't know how long I did that before I had a close friend who was a professor at Cal State Los Angeles.
Yes.
And that was my second teaching position. And such an enthusiastic faculty, and I was very happy there. But they really didn't have a tradition of a harp class. I built a harp class of maybe 7 or 8 people, and not large. Actually, Sylvia Woods was one of my students there many years ago. And then, though, good friends of mine also, and I tell students this so often, your best supporters will be other musicians, not harpists, but colleagues.
Yes.
And the Schoenfeld sisters were living in Pasadena. The one sister was concertmaster of the Pasadena Symphony.
Yes.
The other was a prominent cellist, and they both taught in the string department at USC. And we toured, we played a lot together. I played the Eger Sonata with them often, and we recorded together. And at that point, I remember Gabo Reidel was chairman of the string department. He was a fine cellist. His son Peter Reidel has a big career. And he contacted me and said, we only have one harp student, and she's leaving. And so that was a very big break for me, because that was the leading music conservatory really on the West Coast at that time, was USC.
I see.
And that's where Heifetz and Katigorsky, it was a very prominent school of music. So
And
they hired me
wow.
to be, I think, lecturer. I mean, it was not the same thing, and that's why, strangely enough, I kept the position at the University of Arizona, because that was an academic appointment.
I see.
I was hired, I think, as an assistant professor originally, and rapidly moved up to full professor.
Wow.
While without the credentials, I don't think any other school really would have been eager to hire me.
Right. What?
But so there I was, really needing to continue the work at Tucson while I had Cal State Los Angeles and then USC, which was a major appointment. And
well as
right away, I think I built a class of 12 to 13 harpists there.
Did you also start your master classes then, or?
That was happening too, right?
In California, I think, at that time?
Yes.
Maybe?
I taught up in Carmel for a while.
That's it.
There were classes up in Carmel. Peter Meckel started in Hidden Valley.
That's right.
And so I taught there. I'm trying to think when I began my own classes in the summertime. Some of them were at Dana Point. I know I wanted to spend summers near my parents, and
right.
So I would have the classes there.
I remember seeing them in the journals.
Is that
about
so?
the classes? When did you begin teaching then at Juilliard?
Well, that's another story. That when Marcel Granchny died in 1975,
right?
And one day I had a phone call from Peter Menon, president of Juilliard, and he said he felt that I was the right person to follow in the same tradition, because Marcel Granchny was a pupil of Rene.
Right.
And I was teaching a lot at that time. I had some very good students. I always felt a little bit unhappy when they would go to major competitions, say with other instrumentalists and whatnot. I felt I was known as a West Coast teacher. I was not known in New York and whatnot, and I always felt it hurt my students. And so when that call came, even though it was a very serious decision to make, because I didn't want to live in New York, and so I realized that it was going to mean a lot of travel, and they accepted that. I think a lot of people do to New York. So I did accept, but I didn't give up my work on the West Coast.
Oh, Susann.
So at that point, I began commuting to New York, and they accepted that too, that I would only come once every 3 weeks and teach master classes and double lessons, stay a week. And I did that for only 1 year, and then I felt it was just too hard. I didn't like staying in a hotel there. The salary wasn't very good either. And so I called Peter Menon, and I resigned. So I think I shouldn't continue doing this. He had the dean take me to his apartment in a taxi, and he said, "Look, what do you want? We must keep you here. You must stay here." It was really an amazing time. And at that point, they doubled my salary.
Oh,
I then took an apartment in New York rather than having to come in and stay in a hotel.
Right.
So I took an apartment in New York, and then financially it was much more feasible. Then I thought, well, I must stop. Something else. I was doing it was, but I had a real loyalty to these other schools. They've been so good to me. So at that point, I worked with a financial counselor because I really was troubled by the whole situation. I didn't know what to do. I was working too hard.
Yes.
Well, he said it's very simple. You go to all of your deans and tell them they must double your salary or you're going to leave. You can't imagine being told that was my homework to do. But he said this will, winnow it down so that you won't be so burdened like this. Well, I did, and they all did. They all doubled my salary.
Oh dear.
So there I was truly. I mean, it was even worse because they all were paying me more money now and wanting more of my time too. So that was difficult.
That was difficult decisions.
Was very, very difficult. Wow. But I did that for a number of years. And still was concertizing a lot in those days. And that during that time, Columbia Arts, their West Coast representative, came to see me and said it's long past due that you should be on our roster. And so then I was working for Canada. And that's when I particularly was touring a lot from, I would do a community concert tour from Los Angeles up the West Coast and then all over California. And then I kept a harp in my apartment in New York and then would travel in the eastern states, southeastern states, all the way out to really middle western. Because, a few times I would pick up the harp in the city. I mean, I would be booked like to Billings, Montana. Where really to drive there for a couple of concerts and colleges there, it just didn't. And this lady there offered me her harp. It was a 23, and it sounded like it should work out. Well, I got there. When I tried to bring the harp up to pitch, it hadn't been tuned. Half the strings broke that night.
Oh.
I stayed up all night replacing strings.
Oh, Susann.
And it's the only concert I can remember ever having a string bag on the stage with me because I was so dubious that I could get through a concert without having a string break.
Oh my!
But so that's an example of what happened. If you didn't travel with your own harp, you just can't be sure what you're going to
have. Then it was 1981 that you came to Bloomington.
Yes. I had heard, while I was living in New York, I had heard a lot about Indiana University. A lot of the main pianists and singers were working at Bloomington. And it interested me because they were colleagues that I knew about, and I was surprised that such prominent artists were teaching in Bloomington. And then I heard that, how I heard, the dean wrote me, and I had heard there was an opening, but then he wrote me and said, "We're all disappointed that you haven't applied for this position." Because at that point, it didn't enter my mind that I should apply. But then I thought this all over, and I thought, really, this is such a major school here. And it was closer to New York. And I thought, this is the right thing for me to do, come make a home in Bloomington. And then my commute to New York to Juilliard will be so much easier. That was the rationale, really, in back of it. So at that point, they did hire me. I came here for an interview and was amazed at the school. And I remember I had a terrible cold, and it was very cold weather, probably in March or April. And the dean walked me all over the campus, which was, a big expanse just in the School of Music. But they offered me the position. And of course, it is, for sure I was hired as a full professor right away. So that was with benefits, which was something quite different than any of my other schools were doing. Juilliard was to some extent, but this was a much better appointment. And I remember talking to my father, went back to California, and I said, gosh, Dad, should I do this? Do you think I need to do this for my future? But my parents were living out in California, and all my family virtually there.
Yes.
And this was a big step to leave California. He heartily approved of my doing it. He said, you should do it. It's the right thing. He was looking at my long-term future and felt that it would be a security that I would never have anywhere else.
Because the commute was that you were having to endure, plus.
I thought, or is that Dad, it was such a generous way for him to feel, because I knew it was very hard on my parents when I left.
Now, did they move here?
Well, not right away, but
they did.
After I had been here several years. Dad always had in his mind, I think he wanted to get my mother close to me. And Dad was considerably older than Mother.
Right.
And so they did. They moved here. And Dad only survived about 6 months
after that.
Wow. But he did get my mother settled here then in a wonderful retirement community. And we had wonderful years there together. My students would love to go out and play. My mother was always on the front row. But it was such a happy thing.
That's a very special memory.
Yes. It really was.
And I think it was 1990. This would have been after your father's death that you were given the award of Distinguished Professor. Is that right?
I guess that was after.
I think it's right. I think
yes, it had to
father.
be after, because Dad died, believe it or not, in the middle of the first USA International Hip Competition.
That's right, in 1989.
Yes, that's right.
Oh.
I didn't put that together either, but so yes, then the Professor
could be here to
award,
see
and that was really also a wonderful honor for me, because I was not, first of all, very few women had ever gotten it in the School of Music, while the distinguished professors were named Janusz Starker, Joseph Gingold, the great violin fellow. There were such famous David Baker, Franco Gulli. I mean, just a wonderful group of men that I was with then. It was a relatively small group.
Were you able to do your concertizing as well when you came here?
I didn't do as much.
You sort of.
I know I played. Mr. Starker asked me to play a recital with him, which I enjoyed doing. But I still I was communing to Juilliard.
Wow.
And I did. I mean, I played with an orchestra at Lincoln Center. I did some concertizing. I was still with Columbia Artists. So I was still.
You were still
when I think back to it, I still was, doing quite a bit.
Wow. Now, today, when you think back, you have so many students that have come through here, outstanding harpists that are out throughout the world. And you have continued your master classes. Also, I know you have classes here, but you also have had them in Europe.
Yes,
is that right?
All
as
over,
well,
really all over. That is true. I feel one of the first big ones abroad was in Brazil, in Brasilia. The government took me there to do really all the harpists in Brazil. I know Christina Braga was in that class.
Yeah.
And then also, when I was on a sabbatical leave, I was invited to teach at the Beijing Conservatory in Shanghai.
Wow.
So that was also a thrill for me. And at that point, I was the first member of my family to get into China and see the hospital that my grandfather had built.
That's what I was
kind of
ask.
Amazing sideline to that, but it was a real thrill.
Oh.
But I taught classes in Granada, in Spain, in Verona, in Italy, outside of Paris, at a school outside of Paris, a big French class. And then in Denmark, for all the Scandinavian countries came together for a large master class that I taught in Copenhagen. I just did a lot of different master classes.
All over. And you, and speaking of Copenhagen, and that part you, in all of these classes, you've met and been involved with competitions, or in Harp Week, that was
Yes, trying to think of the chronology of all this, but I think I was teaching, at this time, I was serving on a lot of
different
competition juries. More than once in Israel, maybe several times in
Right.
the competition. The Gardiles competitions.
right.
Munich, the first Munich competition. And I had the privilege that I'm getting to know very
That's what I was
close
thinking.
friends with Thea Bergau.
Yes.
And then when she was, and Maria Korchinska, the two of them were doing these wonderful harp weeks in the Netherlands, international harp weeks, where it was not a competition. It was such a wonderful experience for students, because they would come and they would just offer a program of 3 or 4 pieces, and would play then before Vera Dulova and myself and Maria Korchinska and Thea Bergau. We'd be 4 teachers. And then we would give them comments and encouragement after they played. And then we'd all go down to the basement and have beer and drinks together afterwards, and had such a wonderful
the camaraderie was
exactly.
an exchange.
It was amazing, and teachers were there from all over the world.
Yeah.
So it really was a wonderful sharing of different schools, of different repertoire, of different traditions. All of that would happen over meals together, for example. And then what happened next was that Thea must have been in her late 70s by then, and was tiring, because she really handled it almost everything. And Maria was in London and helped her, but the brunt of the organization, I think, fell on Thea. Yeah. And she felt she just couldn't do it anymore. She was just
exhausted from the details, maybe.
Yes, right. And I was a good friend of Maria Korchinska's, because I had played 3 London recitals. I'm trying to think when was that, all my life. But I remember she had wonderful parties for me after the recitals, and so I knew a lot of people that were already involved in the International Harp Week. And of course, it was during the Cold War, and Vera Dulova and I became good friends. And only time things were tense at all between us was when we were on it had to be Munich. I'm pretty sure it was the Munich competition. That was just when the Korean jetliner had been shot down. Oh. And there was all the discussion who was responsible. Was it the Russians or and I think the 2 governments were pretty locked in. Russia saying they didn't, and we accusing that they did. And that was the only time I felt things were hard for us. And then we embraced, and we were fine again. But there were a few angry words that exchanged at that time. But other than that, I mean, later she invited me to Moscow to be on the jury there for the competition, one of the Russian competitions. I stayed with her in her apartment, and that was a real experience too. Yes. And we shared a lot of musical things at that time too, together.
It is out of all of this in 1981 that the World Harp Congress began?
So, yes, because that's right.
Is that right?
And because Thea said, I just can't go on, those of us that were involved at that time, which included dear Ann Stockton,
right,
Mario Falco, well, there are so many that were there over the years. But in any event, we said,
Dean Sherman.
We will, and Dean Sherman, yes, we will try to keep this going. And that was the beginning of the World Harp Congress. Victor Salvi also was involved in that. Right. It wasn't an easy thing to do, because we all had busy lives, and we're only there for like a week at a time,
Right.
But that was the beginning. And then I remember Dean Sherman coming from Washington. She would come and meet me at my apartment, and we would work many, many hours on drafting the goals and the mission of the World Harp Congress. And that was precious time for me with Dean.
Absolutely.
She's somebody we miss.
Yes, a strong lady, supporter of all of this.
She was.
And I think that having been fortunate enough to attend many of the World Harp Congresses, I am always inspired by the international language, you might say, that we have together in playing the harp. It's marvelous to have this exchange.
It is. It is. Now it seems that with the proliferation of competitions, that there are so many, we're in a different period of time than we were then, when harpists were, I think, much more isolated. They didn't have an opportunity to hear how do the Russians play the Prokofiev or and that exchange has been wonderful. And then there's the French Association Internationale de l'Art, les Amis de l'Art.
Yes. Yeah.
And there was at a time some sense of rivalry between the two organizations. Mm-hmm. Pierre Jamy was the head of the one in Paris, and that was kind of an awkward time. And I think I tried to kind of be a bridge because speaking French, I was very close to the French group as well. Yes. And then a tremendous honor for me was when they approached me and asked me to be their honorary president of the French group. Wonderful. So I remember when that news came out, my dean in Indiana called me to my studio and said, "Oh, Susann, we're just all so thrilled about this." And I didn't realize at the time what an honor that was, but to be serving as the artistic director of the World Harp Congress at the same time I was the president of honor of the French International Association. Wow. And these were two, if anything, rivalry groups. And still, to this day, there is some sense, I think, of which came first, which, it just has been, and I think particularly the language is perhaps the biggest barrier.
I think so.
Of all the things I learned, I always give thanks that I learned French, because it has really enabled me to work closely with the French people and French-speaking people.
Having lived there also, I'm sure.
Yes,
immensely.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Understanding and speaking. And throughout all of this time, you've also been involved with the American Harp Society. I know you've played at conferences. Yes. Now in 2012, we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the American Harp Society, which is exciting.
Wow.
And this is marvelous how all of your students participate.
I'm so proud that they do. Myself, although I haven't been an officer in the American Harp Society, I've always admired so greatly the women who were Anne Stockman, Dorothy Remsen, Catherine Gotthoffer. They were three of my heroes. Right. And they were busy professionals, but there they gave their time and energy so graciously to the American Harp Society. And also it was such a role model for me, and also I feel for my students, so important for them to join, to get to know their colleagues, to give back to their profession. And so I do urge every student in every class please be active in the American Harp Society. So even though I'm not one of the officers or involved that way, but I do feel I'm a strong advocate.
Thank you. Well, I know with Catherine and Dorothy Remsen, for instance, there's a famous picture of their recording for some movie, and they're both shuffling index cards for the American Harp Society.
I believe that they gave so generously
of their time.
And then, of course, Anne Stockton became the chairman, and that was kind of an interesting thing. She called me, we were together in the Netherlands, and she said, "Now, Sue," she always called me Sue. "Now, Sue, what are we going to do? One of us has got to be the person who handles the details, and one has got to be the artistic. Which one would you rather do?" She said. And I said, "I'd rather be the artistic end of things." And so she said, "I'll be the chairman." And that's how we did it. And we worked so well together. We really a very close team.
And now Patricia Wooster is
And now
continuing
Wooster is continuing.
beautifully. And
Dear Anne, she said, I chose my successor wisely, and Pat has just devoted herself to the World Harp Congress.
Right. And then also we have the USA International competitions.
Yes.
That
Well,
is
that came about.
1989. We just finished our 7th competition just this past July.
Yes. Yeah, they seem to get always bigger and better.
I know.
It
You
really
had
was a
30-some.
wonderful level of playing, I felt.
Yes.
In this competition especially.
Yes. Did you have 30-some?
31, I think,
participants
ended. Over 50 applied.
Oh.
But when it really came down to it, it was a very difficult repertoire.
Very difficult.
It truly was demanding repertoire, and I think hard for the harpist to get around that much music and of that difficulty all at once.
Yep, right.
And some of them dropped because of that. But one thing that happened was that, having been on the Gargilas jury several times, and the Israel and various other competitions, I was aware that Indiana University had the ideal facilities and setup to host a competition. And at the same time, one of my students married the son of the president of the board of the International Violin Competition in Indianapolis. He was a wonderful man, Paul Pitts. And I went to see him first and the executive director of the violin competition to find out really what's involved. Is this even feasible to do? And they both encouraged me greatly. They said it would just be the ideal
location.
And of course, both Dean Webb and Dean Richards have been so supportive of it as well. I mean, we couldn't do it without the support of Indiana University.
Beautifully run, and all the people that
we have the facilities for it,
yes.
And then also the size of the community where the host families are happy to participate too.
Right. And I mean, you've had David Frollo as your chairman,
yes.
and Linda
David have been just bulwarks of the competition. They have been so faithful, and for so many years have helped keep it going.
Right. Now, I know one exciting thing. I remember the first time seeing your Music Works editions that you have done with Linda. And they are wonderful. They're wonderful.
We were laughing about this on the telephone. She reminded me of some things that actually I'd forgotten. That I was teaching a master class at Ohio University, and she very graciously agreed to drive over there with me. It was about a 6-hour drive. And two things happened. The first was that I forgot my clothes. I think I was traveling in jeans, and I got there to do this master class, and it turned out I'd left my whole pile of clothes on the bed at home and never been back. So I just had to dash out to a dress shop here and everything. I really, literally had left my clothes at home. So that I'll never forget that class. But coming back, we were so excited. Already going over, we had started talking about the idea of starting our own publishing company. And she reminded me that what we were planning at that time was the Graded Recital series. That was the first thing we really published, I think, was the Graded Recital. And we just had more fun. We were so intensely talking about it that we didn't realize we ran out of gas. And it was in the middle of winter, and we had to go through snowdrifts to get up to her house and call for help. I had forgotten all about that. She reminded me, and it all came back to me. But that was the beginning of Music Works.
Well, I must say, every student loves to play Moonlight. That is their very favorite piece to play.
Not Stars?
No, Stars. Yeah, well, both of them.
Just kidding.
And all the way through the book, they're marvelous. And then you've come out also with the many other editions, your Christmas music, your music for worship. And
the music for worship and weddings, I think, came after the Graded Recitals.
Yes.
And then the Christmas ones.
Christmas, and then most recently the Harp Olympics.
Yes.
Yes, marvelous.
That was a big, big project. It
Oh.
went on for many years, really.
And are you working on a new
And we are working
project?
on a new book, and that will come out. Soon.
Okay, for adults, I think.
Yes. Yes.
And a marvelous thing that you did, we talked about this, the private lesson that you
Yes.
published about the thoughts
For the
teacher and the student, which is now being
combined into one pamphlet for both of them. But
you talked about this, I remember, at the Philadelphia conference in 2004 in your class, and everyone should read this.
Well, they're just personal thoughts that I had that often I would be flying back to Los Angeles or here from teaching at Juilliard, and I would be excited about the students I had heard and the work that we were doing together. And I just felt a number of ideas that I felt would help either the student or the teacher. I kept seeing it from both perspectives, what needs to happen in lesson. It's such a special time, a private lesson.
Yes.
And that's really why I was motivated to write those pamphlets.
Thank you, Susann, for the wonderful articles that you put in our AHS Teachers Forum. This one especially was about repair points.
Yes. And that really came from Mademoiselle Renier.
And also we have in the Heart Journal, winter issue of 1990, when you had an interview with Beverly Larson Optinoski. This is soon after you were awarded Distinguished Professor
Is
at
that
IU.
when that was?
And this is a marvelous interview with photographs as well. And I vividly remember reading this. You were in charge of the translation.
Yes, I felt so strongly that
this should be
people didn't really know enough about Mademoiselle Renier and her life.
Yes.
She was such a wonderful person. And, she had such fame in Paris. And people came all over to hear her recitals. I mean, it was at a time, first of all, there were few women artists. For instance, Nadia Boulanger, who was quite famous in our time, was a great fan of Mademoiselle Renier. She wrote incredible letters to her after her concerts. I mean, she truly was so famous. Her recitals were so famous. And one of the first women to write her own concerto and perform it with a major symphony orchestra in Paris, the Concert of Lamoureux. But as a teacher, she gave such wonderful attention to detail and always with love. But such an ear, such a marvelous musician. Balances were so important to her. And there were things like short articulation, la petite articulation, was such a very important part of her method in teaching, using just the first knuckles of the fingers for a special, very light, very fast pianissimo passages, which she used so much in her writing in Ballade Fantastique and the Legende, the Dance of the Elves. All of that was, she had a genius for the right position for the right sound. And it varied all the time according to what the demands of the music were.
Right.
She also constantly searching for certain sonorities, whether then sometimes lower on the strings. Much of her teaching, in my music, I see lower on the strings. And that would give a clarity where the strings are less resonant than up in the middle. And those were things that I feel that she was a master teacher.
In Renier's method book, her wonderful book, she particularly discusses her relaxation method, her technique. And this is an important thing I know that you also pass on to your students.
Yes, in her method, Mademoiselle Renier wrote that suppleness, la souplesse, is the base of her method. And
Yes.
I think she always felt that true facility and virtuosity comes from a supple hand.
Because of the sound that she
The
would
sound,
produce.
you know,
Right.
she was so opposed to la raideur, she would talk about, which is stiffness,
Okay.
which is the opposite, of course, of a relaxed hand. And she herself played with such suppleness. It always was so gracefully done. It was, and I remember one of the most vivid memories for me is because when I was working with her, she was, 79, 80?
Yes.
That she was very, very thin. She didn't eat much. She was just skin and bones, really.
Oh my.
And so her fingers, were also very, very thin. And
Yes.
she would say, I'll hold my thumb upside down if necessary to get the right sound. She loved thumbs. She felt, that the thumb was our most expressive finger. And she, her lessons on that, the right amount of pressure. Where are you pressing on the finger? Is it supple? Is it warm? Those were adjectives, that she used. And she searched in all her life. What a model, because she herself searched all the time for the right sonority, the right quality of sound, the right balance between fingers.
Yes.
And
in her teaching of this, were there any special things that she would impart to you, that she would say, just to relax? Would she come up and
yes, she was a very hands-on teacher because, particularly, I remember in studying the Prokofiev Prelude in C with her on this very subject. She would come around behind the harp and take hold of my hand, which was playing the pattern up here. And this is how she would demonstrate short articulation, was by immobilizing the inner part of my hand. And so really all you could play with was this. You would not be able to make a big gesture like that.
I see.
And I have often used that in my own teaching because people often don't understand what is short articulation, where you really truly, you're articulating from the first knuckle, not with the cooperation, of course, of these, but it's more coming into the upper part of the hand.
Yes.
And to me, that was one of the things I remember in the lessons, her teaching. And then she talks about visible relaxation and invisible relaxation, where she was very opposed to large gestures. She felt it was distracting to the music. Her philosophy was the suppleness. And while she would draw things out, there was never anything that was a violent gesture, or I think in our day we see these enormous gestures. I think sometimes it's gotten out of control, that students are just not aware of how that looks.
Right.
And she herself played in very close to the strings all the time, very, very close, except for sustained chords, when of course she would come out to some degree.
Right.
But
was her heart
an Erard? Yes.
Okay, and it was
all
a
of us
straight
played
board?
on Erards in Paris, and they were straight soundboards.
I was thinking about that.
They were, but they had a special sound.
Yes,
I really did love practicing on those Erards.
Wow.
They were a bit noisy, maybe the action and whatnot, but the quality of the sound, it was really very, very special.
The way that you produced the sound.
Yes, and those harps,
Yes.
they were wonderful.
Well, I know that you are extremely proud of all your students, and I think within this year, this just came out by one of your doctoral students, now Dr. Jamie Hefner, and this was her doctoral dissertation, and this is a marvelous addition, that adds to and explains so clearly.
Yes, it was written, by one of her dearest students, who later became a very close friend too. And I knew Odette de Montesquieu during my years and trips back and forth to Paris. And she knew Mademoiselle Renier so well. And she captures her personality somewhere so vividly in the book. through letters. I mean, she was such an artist. I mean, it's hard to put it into words. One really needs to read the book to understand, because I feel the combination of Henriette Renier, the living harp,
Yes.
that I did help translate. I cried over it actually for many, many times.
Yes.
Not only because I was moved by the book itself, but because it was so difficult to translate this French into English.
Yes.
I'm not a professional translator, and for me, the expressions, while I understood them, it was so idiomatic.
Yes.
That it didn't mean at all the same thing if you literally translated it into English. So you're all the time having to make decisions as to whether this is really the right English to use. Yeah. Well, and then Jamie, I suggested this project to her because I had just read the book and was just thrilled with Odette's portrait, really, of Mademoiselle Renier. And so now to have it available in English is just a wonderful
fantastic
thing. And,
well, you did have a part of this too.
well, I did, yes. I feel I had a very strong role. But
Yes.
Jamie was a wonderful student, and she did the work with such devotion for Mademoiselle Renier.
Right.
It will really serve many generations, I hope.
Oh, yes. I think so.
Let them know who she was, what was she really like.
And as we said before, Renier was your mentor.
She really was.
Her life.
Her life was an example to me. I think her deep Christian faith was an example to me.
Yes.
Her spirituality that came through in all aspects of her life. Her devotion to music, her devotion to the harp. You know, those were days when we didn't have copy machines. She wrote everything by hand. And I think of the hours and hours of writing. You know, the parts for the sextet that she had for many, many years. They're a famous sextet.
Right.
All of those parts she wrote by hand. And all of her compositions. All of them. I mean, and at the same time had an active career and an acting, performing career, and was always a teacher too.
Just as you have been.
Well, it certainly is a privilege to teach. I think it is I often feel it is a gift from God to want to share what you have, and I feel I had such wonderful teachers. How natural it is for me to want to share all that they gave me.
In your recently published "Praise the Lord with the Harp," the quote I would like to give is in regard to your teaching. I see every lesson I teach as an opportunity to be a positive influence in that student's life. I love to encourage them and to help them. It is a joy and a privilege.
Well, that is certainly heartfelt, because yes. I do feel that way. I do feel that students are so vulnerable, and I think particularly harpists somewhere, because the harp is such a personal instrument.
Yes.
And a teacher can so easily hurt that vulnerability. So I really do think it's so important to encourage them in what they're doing, to always have a positive word for them, and not in the sense of false praise or falsely flattering them, but really drawing out they all have positive traits. They all have very good things that one can praise. And at the same time, to hold up a standard, a higher possibility in performance for them. And that, in a nutshell, I would say that is my work as a teacher, is to do that. I have had some wonderful, wonderful students, and do. And
still do. It was marvelous with the USA that you had Anilka there for
on the jury. Yes. And Isabelle Perrin.
Right. And so that legacy carries on. That's just fantastic. I know that we should speak about the painting behind us in this lovely, inspiring harp room with your harps and the stage. And across from the stage, we have this lovely painting that I know there's a story behind.
Well, yes, when my dear friend and colleague Joe Longstreth, who toured for many years for Columbia Artists
Yes.
as well, when he passed away, he and his wife were living in Naples, Florida, where I have a condominium, and we often had dinner together. And after he died, his widow, Peg, offered me the opportunity to purchase this painting, which was very dear to Joe. And she just felt that she would be happy if I could have it.
If you could have it.
And so I was able to purchase it. And everyone loves the painting, and particularly I think it's just a sweet little boy kind of hiding behind the curtain, probably listening to his mother practice. You know,
Yeah.
It just is a very special painting, and it just seemed the perfect place for it.
Perfect place.
In this room.
And you have the lovely photographs of your students, and it's wonderful to have these reminders, you know, to be smiling at you.
Yes. Well,
thanking
have,
you for the wonderful lessons that you have given them, and you as Renier have passed on to them their love of the harp, and to
hopefully
encourage
that they
them,
will
and,
also continue, and
and
I always hope for them all to have not only just a successful life, but a rich life and a happy life.
yes. Thank you, Susann, for this opportunity to be here this afternoon to interview you for the American Harp Society. It has been my pleasure. I just, it was a wonderful time together. Thank you for all you have shared with us and for all that you have done for the harp and for all of us.
Thank you, Lucy.